Angelique Piwiski. Did I say the name correct today, Angie?
You did it very well, thank you.
You know, for the last week or so, I've been working very hard because I didn't want to let you down, because I know it's important to say your name correctly.
Yes, it is, because I'll never be on here again if you don't. So
I know. Look at my name, Rui. But some people say, "Do you have a nickname?" I say, "How much shorter can you want my name to be? 3 letters? Okay, call me Ru. Would that be best?" Angie, thank you. Promise made, promise kept. And for that, you deserve 10 kudos. Angie, just for those that are just logging in, tell us a little bit about yourself so people can have an idea of who you are, what makes you an expert in history, even though you don't think you are, I think you are. And so does many other folks. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Okay, well, first of all, there are several historians in Yonkers. And one thing about historians is that we each have our own special thing, special niche that we like. Mine happens to be Yonkers in the Victorian era, the later Victorian era and early 1900s. Other people like the colonial era, et cetera, et cetera. So we all have different passion points, if you will. So I started studying the history of Yonkers over 40 years ago and started collecting lots of stuff, started reading tons of stuff, researching, et cetera. Have our own special thing, special niche that we like.
Go ahead, Angie.
Okay, yeah, I was getting some feedback from you. So way back when I started a website because I had collected so much historical information, I thought it would be kind of cool to post it. I had that website for about 10 years and I just, in retirement mode, it was just costing me too much. So I took it down, but that led to an appointment to the Landmarks Preservation Board by Mayor Amacone back in 2009. So, and I had a 10-year run on the Landmarks Board. So in 2019, I had to resign because I retired and moved upstate. Nevertheless, I also was a 3-time president of the board of directors of Philipse Manor Hall, New York State Historic Site, which is the Friends Group, which is the oldest standing building in Westchester County, built in 1682. So a lot of history there. I was on several boards in the city, different things about inclusion. I also won an award from the Yonkers Historical Society, which was the Yonkers Key to History, which is only given to one person a year. And it's been done for like 50 different years. So, you know, history is a fascinating thing for me. As a kid, I hated history because it was just boring to me. It was like names and dates and places and who cares. But when I got older, I realized that it's the stories of people, and people are fascinating. So more study. Then I started a Facebook group. I figured, why not try to spread the love of history? So back in May of 2014, I started a Facebook group, which was about Yonkers history, historic Yonkers, and it has grown every single year. We are almost at 10,000 people and very engaged. There's no controversy in the group because it's history. And, you know, I try to maintain a really good teaching place and learning environment so we can learn from the historic record. There's a lot more, but I think you got a sense as to who I am.
Well, Angie is an expert, and not just in history, but about many things in Yonkers. But we're going to go into today's episode. But before we go further, let me just let you guys know about the rules of, I'm a rule guy. I like to have rules about everything. So we have a structure on what it's accepted, what it's acknowledged. So this is about history of Yonkers, this episode. We are going to talk about the things that, that involve our city in the history field, and nothing else. We are not going to talk about COVID. We understand the implication. We understand the seriousness of it. But this is not about it, okay? This is about history, about the things that happened in our beautiful city long ago that many of us don't know about it, And to me, it's interesting to find those things. And I've been bothering and driving Angelique crazy for a few years now. Yeah, I have to bring it up, Angelique, I know.
Okay.
But finally she said yes. And I think she's a fountain of knowledge. The things that she knows about the city, it's things that many of us had no idea. So today, what's the subject? Bet houses? And
Well,
go ahead.
I'm cutting you off. Well, this was what I thought. We had done this once before, a couple months back, and what I really liked was a lot of people engaged with my blah blah. And I thought, and you thought maybe we could make this kind of a regular thing if that's what people want, and so I had given what, first of all, history is something that repeats itself many times. And, it's because people just don't know the prior time it happened, because it may have been generations before. So a lot of history, I think history is a great background to have, particularly even in political leadership, because it can be a roadmap to things that might have worked in the past that you just don't know about. So today I'm going to talk about the public bath movement in America and where Yonkers fits in that.
Angelique, don't stay right there. So before she goes into it, let me tell you that before this interview, I had a conversation with Angelique about today's subject. And within 1 minute, I found out something that I had no idea. And I was thinking, why do they call this a bet house and not just a pool? And she told me why. So we're going to get into it. So Angelique, carry on. Tell us.
Okay. So what's interesting, and you have to put yourself back in the 1800s, particularly the later 1800s, and even the middle 1800s. We in America were having waves of immigration coming from Europe. The Irish, the Italians, the Chinese, followed by the Slavic groups, the Poles and the Russians, and many other similar groups, because they were fleeing a time when it was there were famines, there was oppression, all kinds of reasons, and no opportunities. And meanwhile, so this stream of immigrants is coming into the United States, and particularly in the urban areas. And think about the ports, because that's where you came in. You came into Ellis Island, you came into Baltimore, you came into Buffalo. These were the places that they would land. And at that time, in order to come to America, basically all you needed to have is a ticket on a boat, usually. There weren't really any planes back in 1900 or 1910 or even the 1800s. And you would show up, and as long as you were healthy and had a person there to meet you, and that person arranged some kind of job that you could support yourself, they let you in. You didn't need to do a whole lot. Very different today. But the point being of all that is that as these waves of people are coming, the cities are getting crowded, more crowded, more crowded, more crowded, and people are jamming into these small tenement apartments that typically at the time did not have a bathroom. There may have been a toilet somewhere in the building. So the notion of a bath was very rare. You did a sponge bath and a sink, maybe. It was a luxury. You washed your hair once a month. And the American population at the time was very dirty. And anytime there's a lot of filth, particularly when you think about factories not being regulated, dumping their waste into the streams, into the sawmill, into other places because there was no regulations, they got dirty, and the dirt caused disease. And with people not washing, it caused more disease. And so back in the day, in the 1890s, it had reached a point where it was critical, because we had different epidemics. Cholera was rampant, all these diseases that come from dirt, dirty cities. So I think, some of it, New York City established a commission that looked at the situation in the city, because it was really, crazy crowded. And they started doing some research to see, well, what's the deal? What do people have, what they don't have? And I'm going to read a little thing, because there was a commission called, they call it the New York Tenement House Committee of 1894, reported that they did a survey in Manhattan, that out of a population of 255,033 people, only 306 had access to a bathroom in their dwelling place. Can you imagine? 250,000 people and 300 bathrooms spread. So this is the concept. So they realized that a lot of diseases are happening because of this. So what are we going to do? How are we going to clean these people? So they had set up way back when these, what they called floating baths in the Hudson River. And literally it was a barge with a hole in the middle and a gangplank. You walked in and you had a towel and a bar of soap, and it was sort of circular, cordoned off, or actually most of them were rectangular. And you jumped in the water in the Hudson River, surrounded by a, little floating thing, and you took a bath and you got out. Now that worked okay in the summer, but it didn't work too good in the winter, since it was outside and unexposed, and, so not too many people could use that. So as time went by, they realized we got to do something else. And so other studies were then done, and legislation was done, and saying, okay, cities above a certain criteria, blah, 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 need to establish some kind of place where people can get clean, because they can't do it in their apartments. So Yonkers was on the forefront of this, because we had densely populated sections of the city where there weren't a lot of places to go. And, again, the disease, particularly from the rivers that flow, because they were filthy, which is one of the reasons why they covered over the sawmill down by the train station in 1917, because the river was so filthy, they needed to cover it. And also they needed some space. So that's a little sidebar. But so in 1895, a gentleman by the name of Cooper was the city engineer, and a few other things. And they all got together and said, all right, let's build a bath that the public can use. And they had all kinds of criteria saying, all right, well, first of all, we need to have it year round, because what good is it in the winter if you're going to freeze? You can't. So Yonkers built the very first in the nation in 1896. It was the public bath. It was on Jefferson Street by Vark Street. It was just demolished in 1962 to make way for the housing down there. But it was the very first in the nation. That separate. We can put up that picture.
The
bathhouse number 1. Yeah. So this house stood at the corner of Vark Street, right a block from Riverdale, and it was built. There was two. You see, there's two entrances, two windows. One was for women, one was for guys. And you would go in, and there were showers. That's all they were, showers. Somebody would hand you a towel and a bar of soap. Usually, you had a bathing suit on, because nobody was going to be naked then. And they had hot and cold running water all year round, and you would go and you take a bath. Simple as that. And it helped a lot in cleansing a great deal of population. So, and this was a huge success. For a nickel, you could get all this stuff, and people could afford a nickel. So much so that 2 years later, they built another one, which is number 2. So we'll show up number 2, which was on Vineyard Street. That building is still there, by the way. Originally, when they sold it back in the 60s, it was some kind of a religious church. I'm not sure what it is today, but the building exists, and it's probably some apartments. But it was another section of the city, and this one again, there's floor plans. You could actually see them. You walked in, 2 separate entrances. You can see them, a window area in the middle on the first floor. Caretaker most likely lived on the 2nd floor. And you would go in and take your shower. Usually it was a nickel or so, and you'd get a towel and you get a bar of soap, or you brought your own. you got cleaned, you dried off, you went home, and the line went on. So, and you brought your kids as well. So this was helping because, again, the city was dirty. You know, people worked in factories, they'd come back, they couldn't take a bath, they couldn't take a shower, they had no facilities. You know, you could sponge bath, but it's not going to be the same thing. And, you know, these are the problems. So we had that. And then this was helping. But then again, the need to spread out. So in 1909, bathhouse number 3 came along. So we can show that one. And you're all familiar with this one because it's still there. It's on Yonkers Avenue. It is a locally landmarked building, which I was proud to be on the landmarks board at the time when we locally landmarked it. And what that means is that the facade itself, the outside, cannot be touched at all unless they go to the landmarks board to get approval to whatever they need to do. Doesn't affect the inside. But what was significant about this one is not only were there showers, but there was a pool. So you were able to take care of even more people who could jump in the pool, and it provided recreation. So think, you know, in 11 years, they came a long way as time was going on. And so again, then they were beginning to build more bathrooms in houses, but you still had a lot of tenements. And then finally, in 1925, which was a pretty significant time difference, came along bathhouse number 4, the 4th and final one. This was on Linden Street. Beautiful building designed by a great architect. It had showers, much more space, and a beautiful pool. So we can show the next one, which is the pool itself inside. This is what it looked like when it was built. A beautiful pool, nice, long, big, wide, heated area that people could get clean. So so you can see there's a lot of space in the thing, and there were showers and other things. And then obviously we can pull that down. So obviously over time, as buildings had more construction with bathrooms, and you know, because these type of public baths became obsolete because most people then had access. I will say one thing too, that one of the things, so they had them all spread out in the city, and it helped because people could walk there. You know, people, if you were poor, you certainly didn't have a car. There was public transportation and the trolleys, and before that, horse-drawn trolleys. So you could get to these places. But they helped a lot because, again, when people are clean, it eliminates a lot of disease states that could happen. And so I say that now, unfortunately, bathhouse number 4, excuse me, was demolished back in 2011. We tried to landmark it as a board, but unfortunately it had gotten into such disrepair that the city issued a demolition order, which supersedes anything the landmarks board could do, sadly. So we still, at least today, there are 2 of them left. The one on Yonkers Avenue that's locally landmarked, and bathhouse number 2 on 27 Vineyard, which is still there. That's on the National Historic Register, which is largely a ceremonial thing. It doesn't protect the building at all. But, you know, that should at some point be on the landmarks board's radar. We just never got to it in the time that I was there. But again, it only affects the exterior. You can do whatever you want subject to the building department on the inside. So I think it's an interesting perspective on cleanliness in the city and what the city did, and being the first in the nation to start to do the hot and cold water inside public bath was an amazing feat that no one else did. Even there was one in Manhattan, but it only had cold water before us. And so, you know, I think there are so many things in the city that has been done that are firsts in the country and the world, for that matter.
Well, Angie, Yonkers has been the first in many things, and with time we're going to be talking about the other stuff. But now on the bathhouses, actually, at least the one I remember on Yonkers Avenue, I remember in 1978 when I arrived in Yonkers, that one was still very active. When did it went out of commission? Do you remember?
That I don't know. I remember in the, I guess it was the early 90s. I took my daughter there for some swimming thing at one time. I'm not sure what the status is today, but the building's still there. Hopefully they're maintaining, that's the essence of it, so it doesn't, doesn't deteriorate. But I honestly don't know. It's owned by the city, so
Yeah,
that's a
but
good question.
yeah, but bathhouses were very popular back in those days until actually the 90s, 80s, when the AIDS epidemic hit, I think, United States and the world. Then it became an issue, but it was extremely popular. I know many kids that, families where the kids went there to learn how to swim. Like today they go to the YMCA. Back in those days, they went to the bathhouses.
That's right. And we only had, at the time, the first two didn't have pools. So you only got a pool in 1909 on Yonkers Avenue. And then in 1925, you had the one on Linden Street. So you didn't, there's a big space gap in between. But yeah, that was where kids would go to learn to swim. And they, it was, I think, an interesting time in history. But, I go back to, a lot of people talk about, the good old days and the good old days. And they were, when you start thinking about the good old days, right? In terms of people being social, yes, because we didn't have distractions. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have beepers and all the other things that came along. There were, back in the day, there was no radio or television or nothing. Everything was live entertainment. So that's why there's, in some of the old Victorian houses, there's a music room you used to have a piano, because the family would get together and somebody would play some instruments, and, like they do in the rural parts of the United States still. Families, everybody played something and you get together and you socialize. So we've lost a piece of that, that social, there's an old expression that says the more that we use social media, the less social we become. And it's quite true, when you think about it, we lose that. Now, of course, it's particularly valuable right now because we can't be social, but we will, everything has its day. So I think, the good old days in some aspects were, but I can just see these people. We had a picture, I think 2A, if you have 2A up there, which was bathhouse number 2, with children, with bare feet in a dirt road. Vineyard Avenue was a dirt road back in, this is about 1900, 1901 maybe. So all these kids are standing in the front there, presumably ready to go in and take showers. You can see some older people in the back, and they had to be filthy. I mean, they're walking around with bare feet, and I'm sure it was summertime, but still, it's these are the kind of things where the good old days weren't necessarily, unless you had a lot of money, the good old days.
Hey, Angie, I'm sure that some of these kids right here, I'm sure that they might be the grand or great grandparents of some of the folks that are watching us today.
Absolutely. If you think of a kid maybe 5 or 6, 7 years old in 1900, right? Yeah, great grandparents probably. Depends on, I'm old, but other people may not be. And yes, it's true. These are and Yonkers has a lot of families that have been here for generations, and I think that's the interesting thing too, that to actually look at these things, and you'll realize that I think the other point I want to make just about sociability is that, in addition to, like, Yonkers used to have tons of, we're talking about like 1900, tons of parades, tons of bands, live bands, celebrate everything. Everything was always, because there was nothing else to do. You didn't go home and watch TV. Didn't exist. So unless you created music in your house, you went out and you went to a celebration of some sort. So very different, a different time and a different era. And of course, the city was smaller back then, you know, and also the whole thing about the immigrants, especially if you spoke a different language, you'd go in a neighborhood, you'd create a neighborhood. The Germans had a section of the city. You know, the Slavic peoples settled in the hollows because it reminded them of the old country and the rolling hills, you know, and so all of that stuff, everybody had a thing, but they came together to support each other because it was a new experience for them. They had not been in America. And then at some point, if people want to, you know, I'll do another one. I've given several courses on this one.
Angie, before we go, let me ask you, I'm looking at this picture here and I see white kids, black kids. There was no division between only whites allowed, no blacks, or was it mixed race? Anyone could go there and socialize and take a swim in the pool? Was any racial issues? Because I see mixed here. I see.
Yeah, I don't, particularly when it comes to being clean, I don't see that. I know that at different times in the city, they had, I forget the name of what they called it, but there were sections where people of a certain ethnic group could not buy a house, or they called it restricted. But, you know, that's another another time. And
no, I'm talking about in the context of the bathhouses.
Yeah, I don't see that would have been an issue. You came in and you whoever you were, you got clean, you know, was more important. So no, there was no limit to like who you were. You could come and take a bath.
Just to be known, because these might be questions that people might have. Yes, it's beautiful, the bathhouses. The intent is to give you a place where you can go and wash yourself. But now, can blacks and whites go and wash themselves at the same time? Or maybe whites Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and blacks Tuesdays and Thursdays?
That I don't know, but I do know that Yonkers was more progressive on that front. Okay. You know, there were some very successful African-American folks back in the turn of the last century with different businesses, doctors, etc. So Yonkers was a more accepting place. Not totally. I mean, you know, every city had its issues, and what certainly wasn't right. But it, you know, again, the good old days, not necessarily the good old days for everybody.
So Yonkers was a progressive city back in those days, and Yonkers still a progressive city today.
I think that's a very fair statement. That. People, for the most part, you know, again, think about where these bathhouses were put. They didn't put it in the in Park Hill because people didn't need it. The houses were more elegant and pretty, and they had facilities. They put it in the slums, in the real dense urban areas where there weren't these facilities. So of course, who's living there? A very wide, diverse group of people who came over for a better life, and we're predominantly working in the factories, you know, crammed into small apartments. And, you know, just a different time, but that's the resources that the city gave them at the time. And it was important to, you know, to maintain the cleanliness of the populations. There's a book that was written, I forget the rest of the title, but it's about the Great Unwashed. And somebody did a lot of research on these bathhouses and stuff, not just Yonkers, but all over the place. And, you know, it talked about the whole situation that most people had no idea about. You know, we take a bathroom for granted. We all got one, usually, at least most everybody. And some people have, I mean, I have one, but some people have more than one. Some people have 3 or 4 in a house that, you know, everybody's got their own bathroom. You know, you were lucky if, you know, again, with that statistic, you know, 300 bathrooms to 250,000 people is a little insane. We have a line around the block every minute. It's like, okay, it's 4 a.m. I need to go to the bathroom before everybody else wakes up. You know, it's very strange to even think about that. Things
have changed, Angie. I imagine, you know, back in those days, if somebody needed to go for number 2 and
like somebody's banging on the door, hey, get out of there. Well, also think about this, that even a bathtub, right? A lot of times houses did not have indoor plumbing. So you might have a tub that you could get from someplace, usually with tin, and somebody would have to go back and forth and get water to fill it. So you would, some of it you could heat on your wood stove in the kitchen, and in a cold water flat, there was always a tray of water in these wood stoves that they'd keep warm. So you try to be adding warm water into the cold water. And there's another old expression that said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that came from the fact that when you filled this tub and you had 10 people living in this little apartment, the oldest adults would take baths first and the other adults would go, and the baby was always last. And the water, of course, had to be filthy because you couldn't see to the bottom. And so the whole point is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, even though you can't see the baby because the baby's there. Even though
I'll tell you one thing, Angie. I'm not that old, but where I come from, technology and advance in the civilization did not catch up as quick as it did here in the States. But I remember my mom giving me a bath in something that we called tina. Tina was a small bathtub, normally made out of wood, like these beer, how they call it, barrels.
Beer barrel, yeah.
Yeah, half of a beer barrel. They would heat up the water on a stove, that wood stove, not gas, because there was no gas back then. Yeah. Or, you know, the refrigerator was not electrical. We used to go and buy big bars of ice, put them on the refrigerator to maintain.
I didn't know you were 150 years old. Good grief.
Well, that when I tell my friends this story, they tell me, no, this is long before your time. I said, no, that was my time. But I lived in this rural area back in South Africa, where those things did not come to us many years after it came to you in United States. Mm-hmm. Even the iron, you know, clothing iron, you know, you had to open the top, put the, what they call it, chuck in there, put it back on, close it, fire it up for the iron to stay hot, or you would put the iron itself on top of the fire to heat it up and then iron the clothes. So
even think of like 20 years ago, I had some friends who had come over from Europe, and in the hollows, there were still cold water flats. And I don't even know if people know what they are, but they're basically railroad rooms where there was a stove in the kitchen, but nothing was heated. You got the heat from the stove. So you left the doors open to all the rooms along the way. So whoever had that last room was always freezing. And my mother used to talk about that in Brooklyn when they were growing up. She goes, well, I had the last room, and her mother would make, you know, Polish pig's feet, whatever the recipe is. And she would put it in my mom's room because it was the coldest. It was like the refrigerator. So, well, we can't even think about that today. You know, we you know, God, if it goes back below 65, we're all freezing. But think about freezing, you know, just a very different era of time. And then way before that, it was, you know, far different too. So.
Exactly. So is that anything that you want to bring it up now, in relation to what today's subject is?
I think we, you know, in a very broad stroke, I've kind of covered what they were, where they were, why they were, which was the most important thing. And the fact that, again, in so many other things, Yonkers has always been on the forefront of a lot of these kinds of things. And I think, you know, if people like this kind of talk, and if we do it again, because if they like it, we'll add some more different kinds of photographs. I love to talk about the Alexander Smith and Sons Carpet Company. I give several courses on that because it's just amazing to think a third of the population of the city was employed by organizations like that, and all the things that happened. So it's so many different topics. And I think it's a matter of, if people are interested, you know, I'm more than happy to talk, and we can, you know, this was an experiment trying to use pictures to see if you could actually see them. And, you know, I mean, my collection of stuff is vast. I've got thousands of images and stuff, and, you know, each one can be used to make a point. So I just think in general, the takeaway here is that Yonkers was and still is on the forefront of many things. And I believe that if our youth knew a lot of these things, they would be proud of the city they live in. And that's the important piece. History is, for the most part, should be filled with things that you can be proud of. And certainly there's things you're not proud of, but by and large, when you have a progressive city or town, a village, a city, you're able to teach from that. And so that's kind of my takeaway. It's like, be proud of where you live, because the historic record is pretty amazing.
Well, Angie, I think proof is in the pudding. Okay, on our first show, we have thousands of people watching it. They loved it. I can see the comments here. Nice to see you again. Enjoyed your knowledge of Yonkers. Great show. So I think it's a very positive feedback. And I'll certainly hope that we could do this occasionally. I don't know, what do you think about us putting a survey out and say, what is the thing that you see or think it's most interesting about Yonkers in the context of history? Sure. And people will put it up. Then I will pass it on to you, or you can even see it on the page itself and say, okay, we're going to pick this subject or whatever subject. Or you, as an historian, you can pick the subject and say, okay, today we are going to talk about this. And those that are interested in that subject log in, and those that are not, because you cannot keep everybody happy. There will be subjects that some people are feel very interested about, others not. So that's the way things are.
Well, I think the bottom line is that there are certain topics that almost, if you've been in the city at any length of time or have ancestors who lived here, there's certain topics that are so universally appealing to want to know more, particularly things like the carpet mill, Otis, some of the core businesses of the city way back in the day. These are things that people need to know more about or want to know more about and just don't, and are interested in, and it's a good gauge, because when I was teaching a lot of different courses for Westchester Community College, I would make topics. So I would see how many students I got based on the topic, and some didn't have that much appeal. Others were like gangbusters. So I kind of have a sense of what some people, but it would be nice to hear from anybody. If there's something that you really want to know more about, and I know, and if I know enough about it, I'll be more than happy to come on here and talk.
Okay, so we will talk and set up a plan. Now, Angelique, just before we end up we conclude this interview, tell our folks, our audience, about your great page about Yonkers history, and explain what that page is about. It's not like Yonkers Voice where you go to debate. It's a page about history of Yonkers where you put old picture, I think up to a certain era. So please, invite them if you like, tell them about it.
Okay, so I briefly mentioned before. So it was about May of 2014, I realized that there's almost a pent-up demand to know more about Yonkers history, particularly the history of our ancestors, not 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So I created a group called Historic Yonkers Early Photos and Stories, and you can easily find it. The rule is basically that my goal was to have people go into their attics, open those chests, post pictures of their ancestors, and and try to learn more about whatever. And then I had tons and thousands of pictures that I would put up and then talk about. So it's not just put a picture and don't say anything. It's like, say as much as you know about it, and then all of a sudden there's a number of historians on the group who will chime right in. For example, if anybody posts a picture, again, it's pre-1960s, hopefully way before, but I kind of use the cutoff there. And if someone posts a picture of, let's say, a 1920s picture of a police officer, well, we have George Rutledge, who is the police historian, and he just did a book with this. It's literally, I ordered a copy of it. It's called Brass Buttons and something or other. He did a biography of every single police officer that ever worked in the city from 1871 till 1971, the first 100 years. The thing is like 5 inches thick. It weighs pounds and pounds. It took 20 years of research. So whenever somebody posts a picture of an early police officer, he will get on and go, yes, that's Officer Jones, and Officer Jones fell off a horse and stopped a bank robbery and got da 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 da. And then somebody will say, well, my relative was this and that. And then he'd get right on there and say, yes, in fact, you know, et cetera. So we have people like that. We have an archivist friend from the Episcopal Church who has records going back to the 1600s that can be accessed. And so this is the thing I love. Somebody posts something, they know enough about it. And then all of a sudden, what I also love is that people will post, yeah, this was my great aunt Millie, you know, in 1920 something. And then somebody will say, well, wait a minute, my great aunt, you know, Louise was on that block, and, you know, and I see my Aunt Louise in that picture, you know, whatever it is. It connects people too, like connects the ancestral ties, which I love. So we have no controversy on the group. And, you know, once in a while I get somebody that just wants to be a pain, and I have no problem, just like, bye, I don't have time for you. Have a nice day. Go on to some other group and complain. So
go to Yonkers Voice and complain.
That's right. Go to Yonkers Voice and just tell them what you think. But I don't want to know what you think, because.
But so, you know, on Yonkers Voice, we use a little bit of the same concept. When you post a topic on our page, we ask for the context of the topic. If you post a picture, a video, we need to know what that's about, so people can make a comment based on the context. We don't read minds. You might know what you meant by posting the video or the picture, but all we see is the picture. So just like you. But well, again, our page has a different goal than your page.
Absolutely. And the beauty is that, you know, in order to see this this presentation, I mean, your group has got like 27,000 people. Mine's got 10, almost 10. And there's probably a lot of people that don't cross-pollinate from one to another. So in order to see this, they'd have to join your group, which is great. Or they can watch it on YouTube later because you post everything, and then eventually find their way to your place too. So I think it just, the more that we, you know, the one thing I do love is the collaboration between groups. And when you think about it, you know, between your groups, my groups, and other groups, we reach almost all of the people, past and present, you know, who may have moved away in the city. So we can, together, we can do some amazing things.
No doubt.
And that's what I particularly like, the collaboration piece of it. So, you know, I'm teaching history, you know, you're teaching, like, you're, you know, doing a lot more current events, although you'll see some historic stuff on your stuff too, which I think is great. And then the other sites are about pictures and this, that, and the other thing, and memories, and which is great too. So it fills that gap between my pre-1960s and, you know, current day. And, you know, I mean, there's some topics that the minute you post anything, all of a sudden it's through the roof, like Landy's wedges and all that stuff. I mean, good Lord, it's like, you know, if they could clone that today, they'd have lines down to, you know, across the city. So it's stuff like that, that, you know, there's certain things that resonate with people. And, you know.
Well, on that note, we say thank you, Angie, and hopefully we will join again soon and have a different subject and talk about it.
Absolutely.
Just have an organic conversation like we just did, and tell people about it. I think people will love it.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity. I think it's, you know, any way that I can advance the knowledge of history, I think it's very important, particularly for our youth, as I said before. So I appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, hopefully if people react, you know, like they want to hear more, I'd be more than happy to jump back on here and talk about stuff, maybe with even more pictures.
Okay, so guys, this particular video will not be posted on YouTube. Okay, it will be posted only on Yonkers Voice, but you are free to share it to your own pages and groups. The reason for that is because we want people to join our pages. We want to give some stuff that it's exclusively to the people of Yonkers Voice. And perhaps later on I publish to YouTube, but not immediately. So sorry, Angie.
Okay. But I'll put it up. You're going to post it so I can post it to my group.
It's already posted, okay? This is live, so you can just click on share and
Oh, all right.
send it to your group, okay?
Cool.
So thank you, guys. Thank you for watching, and until next time. And by the way, if you know somebody who would make a great addition to Yonkers Voice, maybe somebody that can narrate a good story, can give us something that it's entertaining or something of importance to the people of Yonkers, reach out. yv.support@yonkersvoice.com. Thank you once again, Angelique, and until next time. And don't forget, when you come to Yonkers, give me a call. We have a glass of wine, it's on me.
Well, that's sweet. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Ru. Appreciate it very much.
Take care, Angie.
Okay, you too.